We really appreciate everyone being here today, and I want to appreciate Bonnie Paul's prayer, particularly about praying for our mothers, and we are glad we have our mothers with us today. As we pray for our mothers today, let's remember our mothers, whether they're living or dead, and what all they've meant to us, and what they do for us. Let's also remember mothers who may be filling that role, whether that is because someone's mother has passed and someone has stepped in, whether that is because mothers that are having a hard time and children are no longer with their mothers, which may be good. But let's remember the mothers that may not have their children right now. Though, pray for those children who don't have their mother. And let's also pray for those people who are filling that role as a mother. We have lots of different reasons to be thankful for those mothers and those figures. And let's remember those in prayers as we go forward today in appreciation, and ask for that God keep them in mind also. Because it's where would we be without them? That's all of them, whether they're the ones that we have now or the ones that have filled that role. You know, when Mary Ruth comes in, sometimes when she comes in, she has that smile, and just everybody feels better when she smiles. Everybody does. And we all feel better. But then there's sometimes she comes down the door, and when you look at her grin, you're wondering, what is she up to today? and you know, last Sunday we had a very good service. Mary Ruth's great-grandson, Colin, delivered the lesson and did a good job. And she had a lot of people, Mary Ruth had a lot of people here, families supporting Colin. And we were glad to have them. We had several seniors here. Tony and Joella had Peyton help with the service last time, and had relatives and friends and families that were here to support Peyton. And so when Mary Ruth comes in, she pokes Tony, and she says, "Who's got more here today, me or you?" And Tony says, "Well, I think you may have more than I do, but I still got you beat." "Well, why's that?" "I brought a dog." "What'd you bring?" Mary Ruth says, "I still got you beat. I brought Tanya." So that's what happens when you sit on the back row. But we're glad. We're glad you came back, Tanya. And we hope you come back again. Okay. But
and I hope she still finds me.
But after services, Donnie, and we did have a dog with us. We had Ash with us last week, and we were glad to have him. Donnie asked me, he says, "Well, you ever had a service before with a dog?" And I said, "Yeah, we've had dogs before." And I remember, you know, when I got my pup Buddy several years ago, not a pup anymore, and I was going to make him into a court services dog to be there when I interviewed children, because sometimes that's awfully hard to do. Your children don't want to talk to you, and if you have a dog with them, it gives them a little comfort and lets them open up to you. And I've used other dogs in the past, but I was getting Buddy, was training him, and I brought him to church with me to kind of help to train him to be acceptable to lots of people. He needed to be socialized, and I brought him to church to help socialize him. And he was good with children. That was back before COVID, when it was considered a good idea to talk to children before you made decisions about their lives, that you actually talk to them. Once COVID hit, that was much less important. But so I don't use Buddy that much anymore in the courtroom. But he's still a good guy, and I appreciate y'all the help that you gave in training Buddy. He is not a certified dog, but he does a good job in helping. You know, sometimes when I go low and with my diabetes, I'm very fortunate that I recognize it before I crash. You know, I'll start developing physical symptoms, and I'll wake up even in the middle of the night, and I can take care of it. Some people are not that fortunate, and they don't realize they're going low until they crash. I'm not that way. And I don't go low very often, but occasionally I do. And when I do, and I go downstairs to kind of try to, you know, take something to take care of it, you know, Buddy always will come in there and he will lay on my feet. He sits next to me a lot, but when I'm low, he will lay across my feet, and I appreciate him doing that. Now, one of the things, we've been in the book of John, and we're going to be in John 21, the last chapter today. And we're going to start reading in John chapter 21. It is about, there's a passage in here about being a shepherd, which made me think of Buddy, made me think of dogs, as he's an Australian shepherd. But we're going to read 1 through 17. This is Jesus' last appearance before his ascension. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the other side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Now when we look at the book of John, it's easy sometimes to get the idea that we're just reading a little passage or a little verse or even just a little piece of a verse. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes that's the way we want to go. But we also want to recognize that these passages, these verses are part of a whole. And they go back and they refer to things that have already happened. And we have to pull them all together. And sometimes I don't think we do that. And we see here several ideas that we've seen already. When we go back to chapter 1 of John, there are certain ideas that are put there that we see over and over again. That Jesus is Lord, that he is the light of the world, and it will not prevail against it. That darkness is wrong, that he has chosen to be human and come to dwell among us. We see those ideas over and over. And when we look at this passage, we see some ideas that we've seen before. It mentions Nathanael of Cana. We haven't heard of Nathanael since the 1st chapter of John. And now he's bringing up again in the 1st and last chapter, kind of bracketing it all together. That he's of Cana. And what do we remember about Cana? Remember the wedding where Jesus turns 120 gallons of water into wine? And we have all this abundance. And then again we have an abundance of fish here in this one. We are on the Sea of Galilee with fish and bread in a plenty and abundance. Which reminds us of that time when Jesus feeds the 5,000 with just a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, and then you have an abundance. We have all these little references that bring us back to prior things. Throughout John, we have seen that things in the dark Whether that is Nicodemus coming at night or Judas leaving in the dark. Things that in the dark are separation from Christ. They're confusion. And then when they're in the light, understanding comes. And we see that again. That when they go out and they go fishing in the dark, they don't catch anything. But Jesus appears at daylight. And then things change. When we look at this passage, let's think a little bit about Peter. Peter, he's in the dark, and I think he is confused. I think sometimes we can relate to a little of that. As we read about Peter, sometimes he wants to say things. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're not. He's always willing to do things. But sometimes he doesn't do the right thing. He sometimes is very brave. And then sometimes he's very cowardly. And it's hard to figure out exactly what Peter's doing sometimes. I think of him there on that last night. And he stands up and says, Lord, I'm willing to die for you. And Jesus says, no, you're going to deny me. But then when Jesus is going to be arrested, who is it that pulls the sword and wants to fight the soldiers? It's Peter. He's willing to be brave then. But then a few minutes later, a little time later, I don't know how long, but a little bit later, when Jesus is on trial and he's in that courtyard, he denies. And he has seen the empty tomb. He has seen the risen Jesus. But I think he's still confused. Because he doesn't know what to do. And so sometimes he says, I'm going to go back to something I know. Let's go fishing. I know how to fish. But what happens when he goes fishing? That still doesn't work. Sometimes I can relate to Peter, I think, a little bit. I think Peter wants to be the hero. He wants to do what's right. He's ready to fight with the sword. And sometimes I want to be the hero. I want to do what's right. I want to protect people that can't protect themselves. You want to remember David, when he went out to fight Goliath, he said, I have killed the bear and I've killed the lion. And who are you to stand up to God? And we want to think that way sometimes, that we're actually making a difference in the world. I remember when Peter was at home, he was very common that he'd say, Dad, what you doing today? Before I'd be headed out. It was very common that, particularly if I was going to trial, he says, Son, I'm going to go forth to slay dragons. And we're going to go try to do what's right. And sometimes maybe we do. Now sometimes you never know. Sometimes you are reminded. This week, when I went to Walmart, I ran into a child who's a man now, but he was a child in the not too distant past. It was in CPS care, had a horrible life. And we got him out of that life. He's grown up, working, he's an adult, he's on his own, he's glad to talk to me, he's glad to see me, and he wants to tell me about his life. That makes you feel good. But sometimes you are reminded of other children. I remember this child, as she was, her father was in prison, her mother was just gone, not around. And she was living with her grandmother. She was a young teenager, and she was running wild. And Grandma just says, I can't handle her. She doesn't come home, she doesn't go to school, she doesn't do what I tell her. I don't know what to do. And she was headed down a bad road. And we ordered her into CPS care. And we provided her a stable home. We provided her a safe home. We provided her with counseling. And we provided her with a free college education. And then she said, oh man, look what I did. And we did all these wonderful things. And then sometimes this week, you're reminded of this girl when you get an application for a court-appointed attorney for that girl because she is accused of committing a felony. And you realize sometimes maybe you're in the dark, sort of like Peter was. And when they're out there and they're just fishing in the dark, they don't catch anything. And they look up and they see this guy on the beach. And I think they wonder, what is that guy up to? And he says, you caught anything? And they said, no. Well, do something different. And this is something that's maybe a pet peeve of mine, but You think sometimes, well, I'm well educated. I went to law school, learned all this. I got all this experience, and I know what I'm doing. And then somebody that has no experience, has no education, no training, they say, why don't you do it this way? And that's always, that just irritates you so much, that when this person that doesn't know what they're doing tells you how to do something. But what makes you even madder is when they're right. That always irritates you. Because, okay, you were right. But I think it's important to realize that when they're out there fishing, and they include God, they include Christ, and they submit to what He wants to do, is when they have success. And let's also think of Peter and John here. And sometimes we all need a buddy like John. Because what does he do to Peter once they catch all that fish? He says, that's the Lord. And sometimes we need someone to tell us, to point out, there's the Lord. There's Jesus. And sometimes we need to be that friend to somebody else, to point, there's Jesus. There's the Lord. And I think they were wondering sometimes, what is that guy up to over there? And then here it is. I wonder what the Lord is up to. But all of Peter's problems that we see, and he had his share, what does he do? He puts on his clothes and he jumps out of the boat and he goes to Jesus as quickly as he can. And I think there's also a lesson there. Because sometimes we are in trouble. Sometimes we are in the dark. And we need help. And we need someone that says, there is Jesus. And we go. This isn't the first time that's ever happened, is it? Remember, when Jesus is walking on the water, and Peter sees him, he says, call me to come to you. The Lord says, come to me. And when he gets out there, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when we think of this scene of being walking on water and the Lord saving him, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, you of little doubt. And we think less of Peter. But then we think, well, he had enough faith to get out of the boat. And we think, well, maybe he was a little better. And sometimes we think, well, maybe he should have just stayed in the boat and waited on Jesus to get there. That might have been wiser. But I think the wise thing that he did is when the waves started to crash, he said, Lord, save me. As he knew enough that when I'm in trouble, that when the waves are crashing, life is crashing down, turn to the Lord, and Lord, save me. And when he's out there on the boat, here in John, and he knows it's the Lord, he gets there as quickly as he can. Now, one of the things as we see this, what does he find there on the beach? When he gets to the Lord, gets to the beach, and he gets to Jesus, what does he find? He finds a charcoal fire, and Jesus preparing breakfast. But this isn't the first time he's ever been around a charcoal fire. Remember earlier, just in John, it says, now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And we know that this is at Jesus' trial. That he's out here warming himself over a charcoal fire, and what happens? They ask him 3 questions. Aren't you one of his disciples? No, no, no. We think you're one of his disciples. No, I don't know him. And they ask him that 3 times. And now here he's with Jesus over a charcoal fire. And Jesus is showing hospitality. But then Jesus asks him 3 questions again. The same thing. Standing around a charcoal fire. And it is almost the same question. A little bit different, but almost the same. Is, do you love me? And what does Peter say every time? Yes, Lord, I love you. You know I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Tend my sheep. And so sometimes we wonder, what is Jesus getting up to? And we realize that maybe this is what he's getting up to. Tend my sheep. When we think about tending the sheep, taking care of being a servant to the Lord, Peter heard this, Jesus to tell to him back in John 14. Jesus tells all his disciples, truly, truly I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Now when we read that, greater works than these, raising people from the dead, feeding 5,000 people with almost nothing, we're going to do more than that? But sometimes I think it's that Jesus wants us to be a good shepherd. The Lord has told us that he's a good shepherd. And now he is giving Peter that assignment. Tend my sheep. He's also giving that assignment to us. Tend my sheep. You know, sometimes, again, I think we need to be like David. That we need to protect the flock from the wolves. We need to be willing to kill the lion and the bear to protect them. But sometimes I think we need to also remember, you know, the old Australian shepherd that just sits on your feet and is just there. Because sometimes I think we need to do that. We need just to find somebody that needs someone to listen. That needs somebody maybe just to sit there and just to listen. You know, you remember Job? Satan has killed his children, taken his wealth, and that he's lying there sick, full of boils. And we have the story of his friends coming to talk with him. And we say, they all want to say, Job, this is your fault. You have done something wrong, and God is punishing for what you've done. And Job says, no, that's not true. And they have this whole book of arguments back and forth. And sometimes what they have to say is not very smart. But I always want to remember that before they started talking, that's what they did. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him. For they saw that his suffering was very great. And once they open their mouths and they begin to talk, things don't go well. But as long as they're just sitting there with Job and providing a little comfort, they are being true friends. Now sometimes we look, we had that senior day last week, and we see those seniors. And it is easy to think, what is God up to in their lives? They have so much ahead of them. And whether they're going into the military or going to school or going to work, God's up to something in their lives. And isn't it going to be wonderful? And I think that's true. It's good to think about. But let's also wonder, what is God up to in our lives? We sometimes want to think that we're done. It's time to retire. Kay thinks it's time to retire sometimes. She thinks it's time for me to retire sometimes. But what's God up to in our individual lives? And what is God up to in our lives together? And I think that's important to remember and to think about. And sometimes it may be that we need to go feed the hungry, and we want to do that. Sometimes it may be that we want to send money to the Ukraine to help there, and that's good. And sometimes it may mean that we just need to listen. We just need to listen. To be with someone who needs a little time. You know, this was the last chapter of John. We sometimes think that the book is over with. And the book is over with. The story goes on though, doesn't it? The story went on for those disciples. It went on for Peter as he was to go out and tend those sheep. And it goes on for us too. The story's not over. We're part of that story. Even though it's 2,000 years later, we are part of it. And we have things to do to participate. This is one that Tony sent me. And I think it fits with what we're talking about today. You can't heal the people you love. You can't make choices for them. You can't rescue them. You can't promise that they won't journey alone. You can loan them your map, but this trip is theirs. Sometimes I want to fix things. What's wrong, I want to fix. Because I think that makes me think I'm the hero. Sometimes that's not what you do. You don't fix people. Sometimes you're just with them. That whatever they need, that you are with them. That sometimes we feel inadequate. I think Peter felt inadequate. Sometimes we all feel inadequate. And sometimes we just need to wonder and to look, what is God up to in our lives?
and to think about that. And we think of John telling to Peter, look, it is the Lord. And what is God up to in our lives? Now, if there is something you need, if you are wondering what is God up to and you want to talk about it, we want to talk with you. If you're wondering what can I do to serve the Lord, we want to talk to you. We would love to. And maybe you want to say to us, because this is a two-way street, and emphasize that, is this is what we think you might be able to do. And we want to listen. Or if you want to put on the Lord in baptism, we want to help you with that. But if you have any need, we ask that you come as we stand and end this.